Coming up on our newscast tonight. Seoul Central District Court finds former President Park Geun-hye guilty of bribery, coercion, as well as abuse of power and sentenced her to 24 years behind bars. The preliminary earnings report for Samsung is out. The tech titan's estimated operating profit for the first 3 months of the year marks a more than 57% on-year spike. Calling China's decision to slap duty on more than 100 American products unfair retaliation, U.S. President Donald Trump instructs his trade representatives to consider additional tariffs against Beijing. NEWSCENTER begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. The Seoul Central District Court handed down its verdict on Park Geun-hye, who was impeached and removed from the top office last year for corruption. Today's hearing was the first sentencing of a former Korean president to be broadcast live. Our Park Geun-hye starts us off with what's likely a lifelong jail time for the disgraced leader.
The verdict for former South Korean President Park Geun-hye is out. She was South Korea's first female president, and she was South Korea's first impeached president. And now, that same former leader Park Geun-hye will have to spend the rest of her life behind bars.
I hereby sentence defendant Park Geun-hye to 24 years in prison.
The court sentenced Park to 24 years in prison and fined her more than $16 million. Among the 18 charges, including bribery, abuse of power, and leaking state secrets, the court found her guilty of 16 counts. They include Park soliciting more than $72 million in bribes from conglomerates such as Samsung and Lotte to fund the Mir Foundation and the K-Sports Foundation, both controlled by her close confidant Choi Soon-sil. Her hefty sentence did not come as much of a surprise, as the court found her accomplices guilty, many of whose charges overlap with hers. But Park has a week to appeal to the Seoul Central District Court, where she might have a small chance of the sentence being reduced.
We know that the biggest fish they thought of all was Samsung chairman Lee Jae-in. But on appeal, his case was gotten a lenient degree, and he was released on a suspended sentence. So that might be an implication where there might be a chance, I think it's a slim chance, but there might be a chance that if the former President Park appeals, there might be some room for the leniency.
Loyal supporters of Park Geun-hye are, of course, angry at the verdict. Large groups protested her initial arrest last year and were out in force all Friday afternoon. To keep the peace Friday evening, there were some 4,000 police patrolling the court complex. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Minutes after the court's sentence, the presidential office released a statement pledging to remember this day and the lessons it brings. In a brief commentary signed by the Cheongwade spokesperson Kim Woo-kyum, the top office said this was a painful day, both for the country as well as for a particular individual. Adding, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Kim, on behalf of the Moon Jae-in administration, promised to never forget. Lawmakers were quick to respond to the verdict. The Democratic Party said the court delivered a strict ruling against the former president and that the verdict corresponds to the crimes committed by the ex-leader. In stark contrast, the main opposition, Liberty Korea, said in a statement that President Moon Jae-in should be upheld by today's ruling. The centrist Bareunmirae Party referred back to the ongoing debate on the constitutional amendment, describing the ruling as a clear reflection that the president's imperialistic powers cannot continue. Staying with the long-awaited sentencing of the figure viewed to be at the heart of the massive scandal that shocked the nation, our Park Ji-won has the details of the disgraced leader's charges and the verdict.
Out of the whopping 18 charges that prosecutors brought against her, the Seoul Central District Court found Park guilty of 16 of them, sentencing her 24 years in prison, plus a fine of more than $16 million. These are the specific charges and the verdict for each. Most of the charges are the wrongful exercise of authority, which she did in the private interest of herself and her confidant Choi Soon-sil. She not only extorted donations from Korea's largest conglomerates to support the Mir and K-Sports foundations run by her friend Choi, she also pressured many of those conglomerates to hire contractors on unfair terms. On all the charges of abuse of power and coercion, she was found either guilty or partly guilty. She was also convicted of other charges related to the sports foundations, with the sums of money paid recognized as bribes. The money paid to support the equestrian career of Choi's daughter Jung-ra was also considered bribery. But in the case of donations from Samsung, in particular, an amount worth more than $20 million given to a winter sports talent center and the two foundations, Park was found not guilty of accepting bribes. That's because the court explained that to be considered bribery, there has to be a request made by the party paying the money, which it found there was not. The former president was also found guilty of attempted coercion by pressuring CJ Group to remove its former vice chair Lee Mi-kyung from her post and of leaking confidential documents from the presidential office. She was also found guilty of blacklisting some cultural figures from state funding and forcing cultural ministry officials to resign. The ruling comes almost a year after she was first indicted last April 17th. Park, however, did not show up in court to learn her fate. In February, her confidant Choi Soon-sil was sentenced to 20 years and the forfeiture of some $6.8 million. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Since the reconciliatory momentum built up on the peninsula early this year, a flurry of dialogues have been held. The venue for these events have been Panmunjeom, located on the inter-Korean border. Jong-un gets us better acquainted with the place also called the Truce Village to many, as it is where the two sides signed the armistice agreement.
A 250-kilometer-long military demarcation line cuts through the Korean peninsula, dividing it into South and North Korea. And along this line, there's a buffer zone called the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ, that stretches 2 kilometers north and south from the line. The village of Panmunjeom is in this zone, where the two Koreas signed an armistice agreement in 1953. A string of inter-Korean talks have taken place this year after more than 3 years of frosty relations. But the most important event is yet to take place. That's the third inter-Korean summit scheduled for April 27th at the Peace House located in the South Korean side of the border. Interest has been brewing over how North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will make his way to the meeting venue. It's almost certain that he'll be coming to the border village by car, but as he nears Panmunjeom Building, the southernmost building in Panmunjeom, he could either choose to walk past the land border or continue driving. If North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is to walk towards the Peace House for the summit talks, then it is expected that he could be walking through the military demarcation line here. He'll become the first North Korean leader to step onto South Korean soil since the end of the Korean War in early 1950s. The fact that it was Kim Jong-un who proposed holding talks in the South Korean side is also eye-catching. The move is viewed as a strategy by the young Kim to stand out from his predecessors.
The past two inter-Korean summit talks were both held in Pyongyang, so the fact that the third inter-Korean summit talks are held at Panmunjeom, or to be specific at the Peace House in the South Korean side, holds great significance.
The border village of Panmunjeom is a symbol of a war that has not yet ended. But at the same time, it's also the place where the most reconciliatory moves between Seoul and Pyongyang are exchanged. Jong-un, Arirang News.
Samsung's financial data for Q1 is out, the first since its de facto chair Lee Jae-in was released from prison. Unfazed by being in the spotlight for links to political scandals, the world's largest chip maker easily exceeded market expectations again. Kim Hye-sung breaks down the digits for us.
Samsung Electronics is projecting another record operating profit for the first quarter of 2018, following on from last year's stellar performance. The South Korean tech giant said in its preliminary earnings report that its estimated operating profit for the first 3 months of 2018 hit $14.7 billion, up more than 57% from the same period last year. This beats Thomson Reuters market survey estimate of $13.6 billion. Samsung sales revenue is estimated to have increased nearly 19% on year to over $56 billion. The company did not disclose its estimated net income. It'll provide details of net income and divisional performance when it releases the final results at the end of this month. Analysts say memory chips remain the main driver of Samsung's earnings, accounting for about 70% of its operating profit thanks to strong DRAM demand for computer servers. Samsung Electronics replaced Intel Corporation last year as the world's biggest chip maker by sales. Samsung's mobile business is also believed to have fared well in the January to March period, boosted by the favorable market reception to its latest flagship smartphone, the Galaxy S9. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Facing a worldwide slump for various reasons, including oversupply, the nation's once seemingly untouchable shipbuilders have been struggling in recent years. But amid signs of a slow recovery in the industry, Korea has topped foreign rivals in nabbing deals for the first 3 months of this year. Lee Ji-won sheds light on this welcome turnaround.
Korea's shipbuilders won more orders than those of any other country in the first quarter of 2018, possibly showing signs of recovery. Data from UK-based Clarkson Research Services showed on Friday that Korea won orders equivalent to a combined 2.63 million compensated gross tonnage. CGT measures shipbuilding productivity by taking into consideration the varying amount of work required to build different types of vessels. Korea topped the list for CGT, followed by China with 1.96 million CGT and Japan with 800,000 CGT. Korean shipyards' orders accounted for slightly over 42% of the world's total demand in the first quarter. The domination comes as major Korean shipbuilders Hyundai Heavy Industries, Samsung Heavy Industries, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering won major deals to build oil tankers and liquefied natural gas carriers. After suffering heavy losses due to an industry-wide slump 2 years ago, Korean shipbuilders had to receive bailout packages and are still undergoing structural reforms. The industry has been slowly recovering, seeing an over 61% increase in new orders for the first quarter of this year compared to the same period last year. But with the prospect that the oversupply issue will continue until 2022, the Korean government said structural reforms and other measures to increase competitiveness will continue. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
The amended free trade agreement between South Korea and the United States does not include currency or the fruit market. That's according to the nation's trade minister. Washington previously highlighted it will include a side deal prohibiting both sides from deliberately devaluing their currencies for trade advantages. But Seoul's trade chief stressed the ongoing currency and foreign exchange policy talks are separate matters. Minister Kim Hyun-jong also refuted speculation over providing easier access to the Korean fruit market. He said Washington's mention of market access for fruits is related to the application of sanitary measures to be decided by the World Trade Organization. It's not an FTA negotiation issue. U.S. President Donald Trump responds to China's retaliatory measure over new duties slapped on their exports. He ordered additional multi-billion-dollar tariffs targeting Beijing. Won Jong-hwan zooms in on what many fear are preludes to a trade war.
U.S. President Donald Trump has urged his trade representative to consider an additional $100 billion of tariffs against China. Trump's newly proposed tariffs include products used for information and communication technology, areas which he feels China is stealing U.S. intellectual property. These new additional measures come after the U.S. Trade Administration announced on Tuesday approximately $50 billion in proposed tariffs on imports from China. Meanwhile, Beijing's response has already been quicker and tougher than many had expected. China on Wednesday announced it will introduce tariffs on more than 100 American products, including cars and whiskey, in retaliation against the Trump administration's first round of tariffs. China also said on Thursday it will challenge the U.S. measures at the World Trade Organization. The latest moves from Washington and Beijing caused an immediate reaction on global stock markets. Many economic experts say that global investors lack clarity on what this means for the markets, as the pendulum continues to swing. So as the confrontation between the world's two largest economies could lead to more market volatility in the near future, financial markets across the globe will hope the two sides would soon find a way to resolve their differences. Jong-un, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has sent a letter to the National Assembly. Through it, he urged Parliament to swiftly make revisions to the National Referendum Law. Moon Geun-hye updates us on efforts to get things moving in order to amend the Constitution.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in sent his first executive letter to the National Assembly on Friday, pressing the parliament to quickly revise the law on national referendums that was declared unconstitutional back in 2014. The move today is in line with the Blue House Chief of Staff's news conference 2 days ago.
Leaving the national referendum law as unconstitutional is itself an act of challenge to the people's constitutional right and a serious damage to direct democracy guaranteed by our constitution.
In his letter delivered by the President's Senior Secretary for Political Affairs to the Secretary General of the Unicameral House, President Moon expresses worry that we may see a situation where the public would not be able to vote on a constitutional change, even if the political parties came up with a single great bill for a constitutional amendment. South Korea is seeking to amend the constitution, which was last revised more than 30 years ago, and put the revision bill up for a public vote during the June 13th local elections. However, Seoul's National Assembly has been stuck on the process with the rival parties' lengthy standoff over the proposed constitutional changes as well as over the law on national referendums. The country's law on national referendum was ruled unconstitutional in 2014 for putting a limit on the voting rights of overseas Koreans, with the court's recommendation for a revision bill. The political parties missed the 2015 deadline to revise the act, leaving the law null and void since 2016, which means even if the political parties do agree and come up with a single constitutional revision bill, the people will not be able to vote on it. The South Korean president is now urging Parliament to take action on first making law revisions to allow the Korean people to vote on various national issues and show the political parties' sincerity towards amending the Constitution. This as he puts his foot down on carrying out his campaign pledge to put a constitutional revision bill to a referendum in tandem with the June 13th local elections. Moon Geun-hye, Arirang News, the Blue House.
The government submitted its supplementary budget proposal to Parliament. However, according to our Kim Min-ji, the Assembly is deadlocked regarding the matter. Having passed the original budget for this year not too long ago, the opposition finds that's reason enough to stand against the idea of extra spending. Take a look.
The fate of the government's supplementary budget, worth almost $3.8 billion, is now in the hands of the National Assembly. It'll be used to breathe life into ailing regions of the country hit by corporate restructuring and to help relieve the country's high youth unemployment. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon is expected to address the National Assembly next Monday and call for the parties to cooperate. The bill will be deliberated on by the relevant parliamentary committees before being put up for a full floor vote, which the government hopes will be during the April session. But it's not expected to go smoothly. The government's first supplementary budget bill last year took 45 days to pass amid objections that it meant a splurge on new jobs in the public sector, and a similar battleground setting is expected this time around as well. The main opposition Liberty Korea party is against the bill, saying it's only been 3 months since the Assembly passed this year's main budget. The Conservatives are also accusing the government and the ruling Democratic Party of Korea of pumping in money to woo voters ahead of the local elections in June.
Our party will not discuss the bill until there's been a clear assessment of whether last year's extra budget created as many jobs as the government promised, and until there's been an analysis of how the 2018 budget was spent. The government should wait until after the local elections, look at the job market then, and draw up an extra budget if needed.
The ruling party has been adamant, however, that an extra budget is a must to tackle the dire situation some regions are facing.
This budget is indispensable to helping local economies and relieving youth unemployment, which could become a disaster. The opposition asks why it's been drawn up only 3 months after this year's budget was passed. If they look at the disastrous state that some cities are in because of corporate restructuring and unemployment, there's nothing they can say. The right time is now.
The ruling party holds only 41% of the National Assembly's 293 seats, so it's essential for them to persuade the opposition. But at this point, there's another factor that could hold things up. Parliament is still at a standstill, with rival parties unable to narrow their differences on either pending bills or amending the constitution. The two biggest opposition parties have called on the ruling party to compromise on contentious bills they want passed, or they'll withhold their cooperation on all other affairs as well. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is in hot waters again, this time for an alleged cover-up of documents related to troop deployment to Iraq in the mid-2000s. This comes on top of harsh criticisms he faced over a cronyism scandal. Noah Aram has the full story.
On Wednesday, Japanese Defense Minister Itsunori Onodera said the army last year found activity logs from a controversial 2004 to 2006 deployment to Iraq, but failed to report them to his predecessor Tomomi Inada. Inada had told Parliament early last year that the documents could not be found, but it turned out they were in the Self-Defense Forces' possession at the time. Inada was being grilled by lawmakers over a mishandling of another set of records related to the Japanese Army's peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. That scandal forced Inada to resign last July. The failure to disclose the Iraq records has again raised suspicions of a cover-up by the Abe government to avoid further controversy about the deployment. Between 2004 and 2006, thousands of Japanese troops were sent to Iraq for what the army called reconstruction and humanitarian activities. It insisted the mission took place in a non-conflict zone to avoid violating Japan's pacifist constitution. But experts believe the area was a conflict zone, stirring debate in Japan about whether the country took part in a war or not. The undisclosed activity logs could have shed light on the conditions in the area at the time. The head of Japan's SDF issued an apology on Thursday for the delay in the reporting of the records, reassuring the public that the SDF remains under civilian control. The issue is another headache for Abe, who is already embroiled in multiple scandals and suffering from poor approval ratings. Civic groups also gathered outside Japan's Diet on Thursday, demanding Abe's resignation. If the poor ratings continue, then his chances of winning a third term as leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party in a September vote looks very slim. Noah Aram, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle back at the Weather Center for the updates you need before planning your weekend. Michelle, unfortunately, fine dust warnings are being issued across the nation. How bad is it?
Well, Daniel, these two pictures are taken from the same spot today in Seoul, but at different times. Now, as you can see, pollution is visibly serious at the moment. Fine dust advisories have been issued for the several cities, but the central region is under a warning as we speak. The concentration of fine dust particulates over in Seoul and in Gyeonggi-do province jumped to over 300 micrograms per cubic meter in the last couple hours. And it is expected to continue throughout the night until tomorrow morning as well. Conditions are expected to stay on the chilly side across the whole nation, and similar weather patterns are read over in Pyongyang and in Beijing as well. Seoul starts off the morning at 2 degrees Celsius, while the southern cities such as Daegu and Gyeongju begins at 4 degrees. And into the day, Seoul tops out to 9 degrees, while Gwangju and Busan peaks up to 10 and 13 degrees. The chilly weather will stick with us throughout the weekend, and by next Tuesday, the highs are expected to jump back up into the 20s, but another round of rain is in the forecast for Wednesday. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all from us on tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thank you for watching. Here's wishing you an incredible weekend.